What is up, people? So I just got done talking to my buddy Chris over at the Up and Coming Drummer podcast. Link in the description to listen to the podcast. But I'm about to roll video of the whole interview. We talked about a bunch of awesome stuff. Talked about things like home recording, how to record at home, different mic setups, left foot independence, mixing, just a bunch of practical stuff that like all of us as drummers need to know, how to get a good in-ear mix. So before I roll the interview, which you'll see video of me talking into my computer because we did this interview over Skype, you'll only see me, and it might cut out a couple times because this video camera actually cuts off after like 29 minutes. But I'm going to roll the interview now. Before I do, if you go to timbuellmusic.com/upandcoming, that's actually a website where you can download a bunch of resources, like a mix template, just a bunch of the stuff we talk about. I have exercises and downloads that you can get at this one website, timbuellmusic.com/upandcoming. So go check that out, and here's the interview I did with Chris on his podcast.
Tim, maybe you could give everyone just a brief rundown of your experience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess so. I've been living in Nashville for the last 10 years, went to school and studied music performance, got out, toured for several years full time. And then recently I've kind of backed off the road a little bit, been home more. And, all throughout being in Nashville, even when I was in school studying music, I was recording and doing stuff like that. But, and being on the road as much as I could when like balancing school and whatever. And then, but post graduating, like the only real job at this point that I've had is music. And, I'm very thankful for that. But within the last 2 years, I've backed off of the road and I've been home a lot more doing online education and a bunch of session stuff from home mostly. I mean, there are a couple studios in Nashville that I frequent and a couple of producer spots that I go and track at their place instead of mine. But a lot of the stuff I've been doing is from home. And so the sessions, the online education, and then a lot of people, probably from my Instagram and my YouTube know that I transcribe a bunch of stuff too. So drums is what I do and it's all I've ever done. So it's probably all that I'm good at. So, for whatever that's worth. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
Awesome. Yeah, I started getting into this session thing a lot lately. It's a lot of fun, man. I love it. I love being able to stay here and do that kind of thing. It's I dig it.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, Tim. Let's get into some topics. I know that
let's do it.
We've posted and shared some stories on social media leading up to this. Had some folks write in some questions. I know you get a ton of questions all the time on your YouTube channel. You probably get emails all the time as well. I don't know. How do you want to do it? Perhaps we could just go through some of the questions that we've both gotten.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And chat a bit on each. Cool, man. I don't know. I've got some written out here. I don't know. I'm sure you do as well. I don't know. What shall we start with? What's a good one?
Man, you just launch into it, man. Let's just do it. What do you got?
Let's see. So one question I've been getting, and just to give you a heads up, they range from technique to recording to all kinds of stuff. So, one I've been getting a lot is how to get your left hand faster. Any thoughts on that?
It's a great question. It's an awesome question. I guess before I give an opinion about it, I would say a huge part about left hand is most people don't necessarily realize how much it holds them back. I think a lot of people know whether, and we're talking about a non-dominant hand. If you play left-hand lead, this is going to be your right hand. But for most people, since most people are right-handed, and especially drums, most people play right-handed. I'm actually left-handed and play drums right-handed.
Oh, really?
Which I actually think has given me a huge advantage in drumming because my left hand naturally, because I do everything else with my left hand, naturally my left hand will be quicker to learn and better at learning stuff than most right-handed players. And that was kind of something I discovered in college. I was like, man, my left hand is weak. And if your left hand is weak, and not necessarily weak, but just totally imbalanced from your right hand, to put math in it, this is a terrible way to think about whether your hand is weak or not, but let's say that you can play 16th notes with one hand, with your right hand at like, I don't know, like 180 BPM with your right hand. That's great. That's awesome. If your left hand can only do like 100 BPM 16th notes, you have an 80 beats per minute difference between what both hands can do, which means you can't go any faster than your left hand will let you. So you can only play, you know, if those are 16th notes we're talking about, you can only play 30-second notes at 100 beats per minute, even though your right hand can play at 160 beats per minute. And if you double that, that's like 320 or whatever. Maybe, if the math is wrong, whatever.
Right.
But you get what I'm saying? Like, if the imbalance is so great, you're at some point you're just limited to what your left hand can do. So there are a lot. I have a bunch of YouTube lessons actually that talk about how to strengthen your left hand. But one of my biggest things, instead of like getting real specific with like this exercise or whatever, I would just look at exercises you already do and think, okay, this is how I play it. Now let me start it with my my left hand. So even something just as simple as a paradiddle, taking a paradiddle and starting it with your left hand. And people are going to say, well, it's a paradiddle. It's a mirrored sticking, right, left, left, left. Like leading that left hand will be easy. It's not. Right. Because your left hand has never played, it's only ever, if you're thinking about a paradiddle of 16th notes, your left hand has only ever played the E's and the U's, not the ones and the ands. And that's going to be a totally different thing, both physically and mentally. So even the basic pattern that we all play, like a bar of three, if you have 3 measures of 16th notes, you play the first measure as singles, the second measure as doubles, and the third measure as paradiddles. That's a pretty common exercise probably a lot of us have done. Yeah. If you just take that simple exercise and instead of leading it all right-handed, lead it all left-hand, I guarantee life will be so much better. You'll notice your playing is so much more solid. You'll realize you have so many other fill options because now it doesn't have to start with the right hand or end with the right hand because your left hand is growing in confidence and growing where it can, you know. And I would say, so on top of just like taking stuff you already know and flipping the sticking to start with your left hand, do it every day, even if it's 10 minutes, like literally 10 minutes. Yeah. And I feel like some people hear, I'm sure so many students, I'm like, yeah, so we need to practice and do this and prepare for next week. And I think a lot of students think, okay, I'll practice an hour a day. And that would be awesome. But life, even if you're a kid and you're in school, you know, you don't have the problems of the real world yet, in air quotes. Yeah. But you still have school and sports and homework and that book that you need to read. And then as an adult, it's a joke, man. You have your family and you have your mortgage and you have so finding an hour can be like insane, but 10 minutes, that's actually something we can achieve. You have to prioritize. Now, instead of watching Game of Thrones for 2 hours, you might have to watch Game of Thrones for, you know, an hour and a half. Right. And carve out, you know, but I think that practicing something like the left hand, it's going to be a lot about not just practice these exercises whenever you can, but if you do it every day, you know what I mean? Yeah. To add to that too, like the Game of Thrones thing, right? You know, especially the younger drummers, I think they sometimes look at practice like a chore or like homework. And I always try to tell them, like, especially like something like this, like a left hand, you want to get your left hand stronger. You know, you love Game of Thrones and you're watching that, right? I do this all the time. I'll just throw a practice. I'm on my couch. I throw a practice pad to the left side of me while I'm watching my favorite show and just sit there and just play eighth notes or 16ths. It's mindless practice. It's, you know what I mean? I could still enjoy my show. I'm not really putting much thought into what I'm playing, but I'm exercising the muscles, you know? I love doing stuff like that, where it's not like you have to seclude yourself from the rest of your family or the world. You know, I got to sit here and practice. Like, you could do that. You could sit there and just work your left hand without even having to really think about it while still enjoying a show or whatever. So that's one thing I try to, that I do myself and recommend. I think Benny Greb's Language of Drumming has some really good chapters where like especially the ghost notes, where you're just playing a groove and he has you playing your left hand
on every 16th note, or, you know, accenting different 16th notes. I think that's a really great exercise for people that are looking for exercises. Another one, maybe try playing open-handed. I know that's sometimes difficult for people. And I'm not saying you have to be the next Carter Beauford, but maybe try just playing some basic grooves with your left hand, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Because like you said, we don't use it a lot. We're playing 2 and 4 a lot of the time with it. So, yeah, it's like this big mystery, but yet it's pretty simple, really, when you think about it. Just use your hand.
It's pretty simple. And I would say a couple things to add to that. One, if you are going to practice, like you said, like watch a TV show and practice, I think it's super important that you have the right technique before you do that kind of distracted practice. I personally don't do a lot of that because I'm very much like, if you talk to anyone that knows me, I am in every way in life, I am like, I either hate it or I love it. There's like not a whole lot, which actually like becomes really problematic in a lot of ways. Right. But it's nice for drumming because it's like, I either want to be drumming or I'm not drumming, period. Or I either want to be great at getting drum sounds from my home studio or I don't want to do it at all, you know? Yeah. And that's really good to get better at stuff, but really problematic when it's like, well, you know, you can't be the best at everything. You can't be. But, yeah, and then exactly what you're saying. I think some people don't realize that left hand isn't just valuable for like speed and blazing like whatever during the Guitar Center drum off, but it's the fact that most people don't play ghost notes or don't have a variety of vocabulary when it comes to ghost notes is totally a great example why if you worked on your left hand more, you'd be a more well-rounded drummer and a more valuable drummer. You know, so much of the stuff we love, so many of these iconic grooves we love, it's not just, you know, and like Steve Jordan is a great example. He's played that the standard rock drum beat that everyone learns the first time they sit down at the kit. He's played that so many different ways, not really changing, you know, boots and cuts and boots and cuts. He doesn't really change that, but he adds ghost notes. He adds things that make every time he plays it different. Every recording he plays it on different. And it's those subtleties that, you know, I think a lot of times, so I have a lot of students that are like high school or early college and they're thinking about doing music as a professional or that's what they want to do. And they're looking for not necessarily like coaching or whatever, but just, I think I like to be someone who can say, I definitely don't know everything, but I've done it more than you have by sheer fact that I was born before you were.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's never anything, but so I deal with a lot of drummers where it becomes really hard to teach someone like what is the difference between a hobbyist who's really good and a professional drummer, you know? And I think that that's something that it's hard to figure out what the difference is, but you know it when you hear it. You can walk into a club and hear a drummer playing and immediately know, man, this guy's the real deal. Or, ooh, something feels weird. And it's not that they're playing anything wrong. They're playing the part. They played the fill where the fill goes. But there's just this like, to me, it's like a comfort thing of I can walk in and if a drummer is up there and he or she is like doing their thing and being great, like it's this feeling of like, oh, I feel great. Mm-hmm. I feel secure. Whereas sometimes when I walk in, they're playing all the right parts, but I'm like, I don't know. And it's kind of this feeling of this might fall apart at any second. And I can't tell you why, but I just feel like it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. Yep.
And even if it doesn't, like that feeling I have is not good. And I'm not the only one feeling that. And I think one of the huge things about that is, you know, I think a lot of times as drummers, we think I want to impress people and I want to sound more professional. So I'm going to learn some like fancy fills and some whatever. And really it's like, well, that might be the right choice, but also what if you learned how to play that groove, but add your own flavor to it with these ghost notes? That's something that people might not even notice. The bass player playing with, because the kick pattern didn't change, the bass player literally might not know why playing with you feels different than every other drummer.
Right.
But those ghost notes are why. And all the bass player knows is he played the part right and it felt better than anyone else I played it with. So I hope we play with that guy again.
Right. Right.
You know, and it's that kind of thing that, you know, goes unnoticed or gets overlooked. But, you know, when we talk about left hand and strengthening it, it's not just fills and acrobatics. It's you can play ghost notes better, which means you can groove better, which means you can be more hireable, play more gigs, or be the best drummer at your church or whatever, and you know, stuff like that. So
yeah. So to add to that just a little bit, disclaimer to everyone: if you're gonna do the Game of Thrones practice, make sure you actually have worked on technique. So good point, Tim. One other thing I was thinking about too while you were talking about the ghost note thing, maybe. I don't know, take a book like Master Studies, something that deals with a lot of accents. It can be as simple as eighth notes and just really work on dynamics there, hitting those accents at a certain volume and then keeping all of the other notes at a very low.
Absolutely.
You know, I think those are great exercises as well. Cool, man. Left hand. Yeah, I get it a lot.
Yeah, man.
But I don't know. Let's maybe move on to another topic.
Let's do it, man.
This one comes in from Mike Martin of Predator Percussion. What's up, Mike? He wants to know, I guess, our opinions on stave shells versus ply shells. I don't know what your experience with stave drums is. Versus
literally zero opinion, as I know. For me in gear, it's like. I was just talking with someone yesterday about this. I want a collection of things that is as minimal as possible and does as much stuff as I can get out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have 3 snares. I use one of them for 90% of the things I play and record. The other 9% is this other snare drum. And then the last 1% is this other snare drum. I don't need another snare drum. I don't walk into a music store now and think, man, what snare drum can I add? I just think, man, there's a bunch of cool drums here. Let's hit some and see how they sound. And I'm kind of that way with cymbals. I'm that way with mics. I'm that way with I just want so I literally don't even know what a stave shell is.
Nice.
And I hope I can say that and encourage some of you who are like, I could never be a professional or I could never do drums for real because I don't know about this thing and this thing. Like, I don't either. There are a ton of drummers that I'm sure they would bob their heads and be like, yeah, I totally know what those, and then when you actually ask them, they're like, oh, it's like that kind of drum that it's got and it's like, you don't have to know everything because for me, I always tell my students this too, because a lot of if you grow up and you go to lessons your whole life and you go to college for music and then you graduate, you've done education of music for so long that it's possible that you at some point have lost sight of the fact that when someone hires you for a gig, they don't care what drums you bring. They don't care what cymbals you bring. They don't care what in-ear monitors you use. They don't care what you have in your monitor mix. They care that you show up and you're professional and you sound good.
Right.
And for me, it's a lot of the same thing of I have microphones that I'm like, I don't exactly know why that microphone sounds great, but it does. So I'm not going to question it. Is it what's appropriate or whatever? I don't know. If it sounds good, I don't think many people are going to care when I send them when I email them the stems for that track they wanted. You know what I mean?
Right.
So long story short, I have no opinion as I am wildly unqualified to give an opinion.
Right. Yeah, Mike, that's a tough question. I mean, I've only been introduced to stave shells since I joined your company. Mike sent me I've never played a stave shell in my life until he sent me out a drum to try. I own one now. He built me this custom walnut snare and I love it. They sound incredible. They're definitely a heavier shell. They're constructed differently than ply shell. He's working on a kit for me right now, but we decided to go with a ply shell rather than stave just because they are a lot heavier. And if I'm going to be lugging them around, I want, like you said, the least amount of weight, whatever.
And I'm assuming a stave shell, is that where it's like one piece of wood?
So it's like blocks of wood that are of glued together and formed in a circle.
Yeah.
So they could be really, really thick. Like this is a 1/2 inch thick, I think, this shell. Yeah, I mean, I think they produce a really, really nice sound.
Yeah.
But like you
said,
said,
I'll add to that, I'm sure that there are some stave drums that sound amazing and other stave drums that sound terrible.
Yeah.
It's same with ply. There are some, you know what I mean? It's not always necessarily how it's built that determines whether it sounds good. Or it's not necessarily the process in which it's built. It's the care and the construction that actually goes into it. You know, just because it's a stave drum doesn't make, you know, I'm sure stave drums have a certain quality versus ply drums for the most part. But just because it's stave doesn't actually mean it hits that mark. Might be like a really poorly constructed one and it sounds terrible and doesn't have any of the qualities the most stave. Not this company, but I'm just saying people who, you know, someone who's like, I want to make a stave drum, and they like research it and put it together. Like, it might sound terrible because they don't know what they're doing. And just because it's a stave drum doesn't necessarily mean that inherently it's just going to be awesome and have all the awesome qualities. And I think that's like something that people don't think about with gear more often, is like, just because you played one metal snare drum that sounds amazing does not mean all metal snare drums will sound amazing.
Very true. Very true.
You know, and it's the same with cymbals. Just because you played one Zildjian A custom that sounds amazing doesn't mean that every A custom that ever was made sounds like you think it does, because different years were made differently and, you know, whatever. Yeah, so that's something like I never really try to one thing with gears, I never try to say I love all of these types of things. Like, I love all evolution symbols by Sabian. I would never say that because that's not true. I would have to hear it before, because even symbols like I have an Istanbul ride that I absolutely love, and every time I post a video of it, someone's like, that ride is amazing, and I'm like, it is my favorite instrument I own. But I've played other ride cymbals. It's an Istanbul Agop 24-inch signature ride, and it's amazing. But I've played other 24-inch Istanbul Agop signature rides, same ride cymbal, but I've played other versions of it at other music stores, and I don't like how it sounds.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, but I think that's like the beautiful part of gear too. Like, speaking of ply drums, I have a 1970s Rogers kit that I bought a couple years ago. Great deal. And it's an amazing kit. It's been that's like what I've put on every track I've recorded in the last like 2.5 years. The rack tom, I was changing the head on the rack tom the other day, and I realized the plies are separating. They're like either splitting or coming unglued. Either way, I looked at it and was like freaked out. But then I like put the new heads on it and I was like, man, that thing sounds awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to worry about it. And I think some people, it's like a vintage piece of gear. Oh my gosh, it's going to fall apart. Like, I think some people get really freaked out about that. But I think instruments are made to just like be played. And if they sound good, then let's stop worrying about what year and what, you know, and like some people like to nerd out about that, and that's like totally fine. But like, I'm just so not it's this kind of wood with this ply and in this year because it was in Japan that they made it, and that's why it sounds, and it's just like, I don't know, man. It sounds good.
Right.
Cool.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, Mike. I don't really know. I think it's personal preference. You like the sound of a stave drum, get a stave drum. If you like the sound of a ply, get a ply.
Try it out.
Try them. Yeah. Go bang around some drums. If you guys are interested in hearing what a stave snare drum sounds like, check out some of my videos. I use this thing every day. I love it. Cool, man. Let's see here. Do you have any questions jotted down that you wanted to focus on, or I've got like
rolling.
4 or 5 here.
I'll pull them up.
All right, cool. I'll get on to the next one here because I've got like 4 or 5 left. Okay, so here's a good one. I got a question on how to practice. Here we go with the left again. How to practice left foot hi-hat efficiently. What can we do to make our left foot better for keeping time and things like that? I think it was worded a little bit differently. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Wow. That's a good question. I mean, you referenced it earlier, but Benny Greb's DVD, The Language of Drumming, that whole system is like perfect for practicing anything. But one of the things it can be amazing for is practicing left foot hi-hat. Because it just gives you a system a system of rhythms to work through, and you can apply to really like anything. So if you haven't checked that out, you should absolutely. It's like the best drum DVD I probably have ever watched. But beyond that, you can always do like who's Gary Chester? Is that who did New Breed?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So New Breed is also an amazing resource for left foot stuff. And again, that's just a book where it gives you a system of 3 limbs are playing one thing while your 4th limb reads through a melody. So that can also be an incredible way to, that's like such a good book, no matter what level you're at in drumming, because it is extraordinarily challenging and works like every part of your brain and body at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I just picked up, I can't believe I've waited this long to get it, but Hudson Music had a great deal for Black Friday. So I finally got Jojo Mayer's Bass Drum Secrets.
Oh yeah.
I got the downloadable version.
Yeah.
He has a whole section in there that he talks about just left foot hi-hat stuff and different ways to splash the cymbal and experimenting with the pedal and setting, getting the tilt of your cymbal right so you get the right chick, all that stuff. So, I mean, if you want to get your left foot more involved, I use my left foot all the time. That's like my metronome when I'm over here on the ride or whatever. That's my timekeeper. So if you're having trouble, I mean, maybe start basic. Throw on a metronome and just try to line it up on the quarter note. Then maybe try just 2 and 4. Then try just 1 and 3. Then maybe graduate onto 8th notes. Maybe just the ands. Then maybe all of them. Just try different subdivisions and getting your foot. I mean, I think the toughest thing is separating that left foot from everything else that's going on with the rest of your body. So, geez, it's
yeah. And I would add to that, like messing around with kind of back to what I was saying about the left hand thing. Instead of thinking I need like exercises to learn this or whatever, like what if you approached it in the same way we did with the left hand stuff, is just take what you already know how to play, some of your favorite grooves, fills, whatever, and just start working through those with, like you're saying, keeping time on the 8th notes.
Yeah.
Or keeping time on your left foot as quarter notes. And then try just the offbeat 8th notes. You know? That kind of thing. Like instead of thinking I need to go get a method book and work through the whole method book or whatever, just say like, okay, here's a groove that I really like playing. Let me try and keep time as quarter notes. Let me try to keep time with 8th notes on my left foot. And then let me try to keep time with my left foot on the upbeats, the ands.
Yeah.
And then once you've got that with that groove, move on to a new groove. And the important thing is like making sure that you're not changing the groove when you're doing this. And you can do that with fills too. You could pick a fill and say, I love this fill. Play left foot on the hi-hat and keep it as quarter notes, 8th notes, and upbeats through it, you know? That to me is a pretty good way. I mean, I have a thing called the subdivision pyramid that I take a bunch of my students through that, you know, I think does a lot of what you would want to do. It's a system. I really like systems. I think we live right now in a world of education that is like, okay, I want to learn how to do this fill. So you go to YouTube and you watch a video on that. And then you're like, I want to learn how to play this style of music. So you go to YouTube and it has a lesson of 3 grooves you can play for that style. And it's a lot of jumping around, which is great because we have just an endless resource that is YouTube. But when you're just jumping around like that, it's really hard to get a standardized like way to track your progress, which is a huge part of practice. So many of us will look back at the last 2 months and think like, what have I gotten better at?
Right.
And if you've just kind of been jumping around and bouncing around between stuff, like maybe you can half play this groove and half play these fills you worked on, but you don't have a system that every day you're plugging through, and every day you're hitting technique with this thing, you're hitting groove playing with this thing, you're hitting fills with this thing, you know? So I would say that would help a lot for most people if they would just kind of like plug into a system and systematically try to tackle. And that's why I really like the Benny Greb thing, is because it's this whole grid that you pick a groove, you play the hi-hat foot through this whole grid, and then that groove's done. And now you can play your hi-hat foot on any subdivision with this groove. And now you move on to the next groove. And when you do 20 grooves and put it through and play your left foot through this grid, like, it's gonna be way easier for you to play your left foot whenever you want to if you take the time to work through that system, you know?
Yeah. So I would definitely recommend the Benny Greb language of drumming, and like you said, New Breed 2 is a great great tool to really get your coordination going if that's the issue. Even syncopation too, if you wanted to try to read page 38 as a left foot. As a left foot pattern. But yeah.
Agreed. All right. You want to finish out your questions, or?
Yeah. You want me to go through the rest of what I have and then you could jump on to yours, or?
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. Sweet. Let's see. I got 1, 2, 3 more. Okay. Next question I got here deals with gain staging and proper ways to do it in modern DAWs and recording. This is something I was looking forward to asking you too, because I have my opinions on it. How important is gain staging? Is there a correct way to do it? Is there a certain decibel level that we've got to stay under? Things like that. What have you noticed?
Do you want to take you want to take it, or you want me, or whatever?
Okay, so in my experience, so I've got my entire kit mic'd up, 2 overheads and a room mic, and basically when I'm trying to prepare my kit to record, I go through and check each mic's level. I try to keep that level for each mic at around, maxing out at around, -6, I think. So right above 0, just a tad above 0. That I find you don't want that to be hot. Now, as far as recording, like, I might lay down a groove and go back and watch some of my buses, and even sometimes the master will spike into the red. And I don't think that that's as much of a concern as what is actually going in. That's what I've found. Just because maybe you have a tom bus or something that might be spiking a little bit. It's not necessarily distorting. I don't think that that's an issue. I think it's more about making sure you're setting the levels going in. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, so what I try to do is, like you're saying, make sure all your tracks are armed, ready to record. Go through and play each drum like you're going to play it when you record.
Right.
This is true for sound checking before recording, and also true live. There's nothing sound engineers hate more in life than someone at sound check playing at 50% volume because they're just like ready to go back to the bus or whatever, and then come the show, they're playing twice as loud, and you have to completely change your mix because how you're playing for the show or during the recording was totally different than what you did in sound check or when you were checking levels. So play, probably the loudest you're going to play, and make sure that, like you're saying, everything's hitting at unity, like right at 0 is what I aim for. So if that's cool and everything's hitting right around there, and like, so part of it too is like, if I have a room mic and it's really far away, that's not going to come up to unity because it's really far away, and I'm not going to drive my pre like maxed out, because you have a good chance that if you're maxing out your preamp, you're going to get some noise, you're going to get some buzz, you're going to get some stuff you don't want. So I just run that as loud as I can. And far room mics, I'm going to end up like compressing and doing weird stuff too anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But everything's right around unity, and I don't track with any compression or EQ or anything on. I have some preamps that have EQs built, so obviously they're going through the EQ of the preamp or whatever. But for the most part, everything goes in, and then I worry about buses and all that stuff in the mixing process after the fact. Because like you're saying, I have presets on all my channels that once I'm done recording, I'll sit down at the computer to mix, and I'll enable all those like presets I have as far like for the vocal I'm speaking into right now. I don't have any EQ or anything on right now, but my channel strip has a preset of the stuff I usually put on my vocal. So when I'm done and I go to send it to you so that you can put it in the final mix of this podcast, I'm going to sit down and enable those, and I have the typical compression I put on it, the typical EQ and whatever. And I might find that because I'm this close to the mic right now, instead of how I usually am in my lessons where I'm, 2 feet or 3 feet away from the mic, it might be that I track this hotter, so whatever compression I have is too loud, like the makeup gain or whatever is too loud.
Right.
So it'll be clipping when I first enable that compression because it's kind of set up for a slightly different setup. But because, like you're saying, because I didn't clip going in and I made sure that I was at unity before it hit any of those plugins just going into the computer, it's not a big deal. I just changed the compression and now we're good to go. So yeah, it's really just about making sure that the level before plugins, presets, compression, EQ, all of that stuff, the level you're sending to the computer is right around unity. And then beyond that, I also, like you were saying, what I'll do is I'll sit down and I'll check to make sure all the preamps look like nothing's clipping and everything's kind of set where it needs to be. And that stuff changes from day to day. And like, if you change out a snare, you have a really tight cracking snare drum for one song, you switch to a like low gushy snare on the next song, that cracking tuned up high snare drum is going to be a lot louder than the gushy snare. So you'll have to change your preamp. And if you don't, you're not going to get as much level on the gushy one. And, it's a whole thing. So that's why you might run into these problems. But I always, before I actually start recording, I will record a couple bars, hit everything as hard as I'm going to hit it in the song, and listen back just to make sure that even though the levels look good, make sure I don't have a weird buzz from a cable that isn't plugged in right, or maybe the kick drum mic that's inside the kick drum fell down overnight and it's just like laying on the kick drum, like rattling around. Like, you just want to make sure that there's nothing like, because the worst thing in the world is playing a take and you're like, that was awesome.
Oh no.
And you sit down to edit it or whatever, and you're just like, oh my God, the floor tom mic was buzzing. Why was it buzzing?
Yeah.
And it's because the cable was lying on the lug or like something stupid, and it's just, there's literally nothing worse than that. So yeah.
And mute your cell phone if it's near you. I've done that a couple times where I had such a good take and all of a sudden,
yeah,
I'm like,
right.
oh man, that's the worst.
Yeah, man. All right, next question, dude. Let's do it. I'm ready.
Sweet. This kind of also, actually, the next two kind of are stick with the whole home recording thing. I got a question about home recording your kit with 2 mics. And some of the best basic post-production for social media posts.
Love it.
You use a two mic setup, right?
No, I have. I mean, I try to experiment with a lot of setups just to like see what's happening. So like a couple things. I have a YouTube video that's called "How to Record with One Mic," where I talk extensively about how to record with one microphone. I think the most important thing before we even talk about which mics and where to place them and all that stuff, none of that matters if you are playing the kit imbalanced. Like if your kick drum is super quiet, but your snare is really loud, and then your cymbals are like ear piercingly loud, it does not matter what mics you use. It doesn't matter where you place them. Recording with one or two mics, really recording with no matter how many mics you're recording with, it's going to sound terrible because you have no sense of dynamics or balance within the kit. So when you start talking about working with less mics, the most important thing is mixing yourself as you're playing and realizing that, okay, the mic is placed. So in the one mic recording YouTube lesson I did, it was placed over my right shoulder, kind of looking a little bit higher than my shoulder and looking down at the snare drum, which means that it's seeing the snare drum is like, it was kind of like pointed at the snare drum, and I knew that it would get the snare drum. I knew it would pick up cymbals because the cymbals are a little bit louder, brighter, and a little bit up higher than the snare drum. The thing it really wasn't going to hear a lot of was kick drum. So maybe I have a light kick drum foot. That's fine. But if I'm playing a groove and I really want my kick drum to come through, that mic is not going to hear it unless I play my kick drum louder. And that takes a lot of discipline and coordination to be able to play the kick drum louder without playing the snare drum louder and without playing the cymbals louder. And I think as a whole, when you're recording, anyway, if you haven't done a ton of recording, it's likely that you need to play your cymbals like 80% quieter than you do.
Yeah.
Especially the hi-hat. The hi-hat is positioned right next to the snare drum. And if you play your hi-hat loudly, it's going to bleed into the snare drum mic, which means if you apply compression to your snare drum mic, all you're going to be compressing is more hi-hat, which means all you're going to get across your mix is more hi-hat. And that gets really, really difficult to work with. So I think no matter what mics you get, it doesn't matter what mic you use. It doesn't matter what interface you use. The best thing you can do when you start to think about one or two microphones is, how is my touch? How is my actual sound? And am I mixing myself before it ever gets to the microphone? You know, I think that's the biggest key. And then beyond that, like, you want to have a great sounding microphone if you can, and you want to be in a room that sounds good. If you're in a room that's super boomy and there's a bunch of reflection, it's not going to sound great because you're in a room that doesn't sound good. That's like half of recording or not half of recording, but there's so many, like, I think a lot of times we only think about the mic when really it's the drums you're playing, the cymbals you're playing, how you're playing them, the microphones you're using, the room you're in. You know, it's all of these things. It's not just like, is Pro Tools better, or like, what plugin should I use? It's way more that stuff. You know, any of the great drummers you can think of, sure, a lot of the recordings you're hearing them on they're using amazing preamps and amazing microphones, and the guy that mixed it or the person that mixed it was amazing. And yeah, sure, all that is true. But I guarantee if you took that same drummer and put them in any home studio with not great mics and not a great interface or whatever, they would still turn out with a better product than a lot of people, sheerly because they perform on the instrument more appropriately based on the room they're in and all the other stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think he was looking for if we had any tips as far as like the mixing and everything goes for posting to social media. Have you had any issues like with, because, you know, like we listen to a lot of this stuff on our phones. Have you ever run into an issue where like, oh man, that just doesn't sound, how do I get it to sound better on a phone speaker?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely don't consider myself like a mixing engineer or whatever. I'm definitely a drummer. As far as like my professional life goes, the tracks that I play on, I record, even if I record them here, and someone else mixes them, a mixing engineer who makes their living doing, you know, so take all this with a grain of salt. But I think that for the most part, a general rule is like, if the mix sounds good on, like so right now I'm sitting at my studio desk and I have JBL reference monitors that are great. They're like pretty 8-inch speakers. They sound great. They're like, I think, pretty neutral. They're not super heavy in the mid range or super heavy in the low end or whatever. Cause like you want your speakers and whatever you're mixing on to be as neutral as possible. Because if your speakers are really, really bass heavy, you can mix on them and like everything sounds great. And then you take it to, a car and it sounds really wimpy because you weren't realizing that your speakers are super bass heavy. So you mixed less bass into everything you did. But when you take it to, another set of speakers that aren't bass heavy, it sounds really weak because your speakers were overcompensating in that frequency range. Yeah. So try to mix on as neutral of speakers as you can. And reference, I have my 8-inch reference monitors. I have tiny little computer speakers that are like literally pure mid-range, and they have a really, 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 really terrible subwoofer attached to them. And they sound so bad. So I have those also set up that I can reference my mix on. And then I also have a tiny little, it's like one of those like travel speakers that you can like used to be able to like plug your iPod into, and you could like hook it up to, it's like a little mono speaker.
Something like that, like I have a little Bose.
It's even like smaller than that. And it sounds like pure garbage. It is the worst sounding speaker ever. And it's a mono speaker. So between the nice speakers I have, the crappy computer speakers I have, and then the tiny little iPhone type simulation speaker I have, everything I'm doing I can reference and say like, oh man, the snare drum sounds really great, but does it sound great on these speakers? Yes. Does it sound great on this tiny little crappy speaker? Yes. Cool. Now I know that when you hear it on an iPhone, it's going to sound good.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest things to watch out for are, in general, iPhones are really, they have a lot of high end. So if you mix a ton of cymbals in and you're like, this sounds so great on your nice speakers, it's probably going to be a little bit too much on the iPhone. Then the other thing is on your kick drum. It's likely that unless you do something to it, the kick drum will get lost. So it's really about playing around with. I actually have a bus. This is a little trick. I have a whole YouTube lesson on how to mix drums. It's like 45 minutes long. It's literally me going through every single track that I have. Like I go through this kick drum, the snare drum, the bottom snare drum. I go through every track and talk about the EQ I put on it, the compression I put on it, and then I talk about all the buses I have. So you can watch that. That's on YouTube. Just type in like Tim Buell mix drums, and I actually give you if you use Logic Pro, I actually give you a template to mix with in Logic Pro. But a little trick I do is I bus my kick drum to an aux channel, and I have like this weird, like super weird EQ, super weird, like essentially I scoop out everything on the kick drum except like, I don't even remember what frequency it is, but it's like 5K or something, and it's like spiked really high at 5K, which is 5,000. Like it doesn't matter. It's a higher frequency. Like kick drum exists kind of in the like 40 to 60 hertz frequency, and this is at like 5,000 hertz, which is like way high and not typically where you think of kick drum, but it is where a lot of like attack and clickiness can be. So essentially what I do is I spike at 5K and I add a transient designer that makes that hit a little bit harder, and then I just like bring that up enough just to where you notice it. So it's not so much coloring, and because it's a bus, it's not so much coloring the kick drum tone. It's literally just giving you a place, because like iPhone speakers literally they cannot play something that's 60 hertz. They literally can't. But they can at 5,000. So if you put a little spike there, the bass drum will be represented, and then our brains actually make up kind of what the kick drum should sound like. It's fascinating. So those are kind of like some of my tricks for the phone. Cool.
Awesome. The next question here, I could probably help out with this one. It's kind of a broad question, but what are some of the best ways to play to drumless tracks and post to social media? So anybody that follows me obviously knows I do quite a bit of that. So I guess I could just give you some tips on where to find them, how I go about doing it. Drumless tracks are a lot of fun. I been playing in cover bands for so many years that I just can't even bring myself to sit down and jam along to songs that are on the radio, you know? So I find it a lot more fun to jam along to drumless tracks because you can find all different kinds of genres, funk, fusion. I'm not a big metal guy, but there's lots of metal ones. Some of the places you can look for them would be YouTube, Drumless Practice Loops, Sean Lang's page. He puts out a lot of great stuff. You could literally just type in drumless tracks on YouTube, and you'll find all sorts of different channels that have them. Some that are actual songs with drums removed, and then some that are just compositions from the guy that runs the channel that he writes himself. Some with click, some without click. You can also you can go on like, I don't know, iTunes or Spotify. A lot of those, you could find a lot of albums that have drumless tracks. Trying to think where else.
Yeah, I would say Tommy Igoe came out with 2 books called Groove Essentials, like Part 1 and Part 2, or 2.0 and 1.0 or whatever. And I think those are great because they're not just... So a couple things about play-along tracks is I think a lot of people are tempted to just like throw it on and then just like play whatever they want, which is cool. You absolutely have free will and can do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if you want to use a play-along track as a practice tool, the Groove Essentials stuff is cool because it's a bunch of play-along tracks that don't have any drums in them, and then also examples of what grooves you can play with them, variations of those grooves, and then they give you a chart that lays out the whole song form. So it's a really good way to say, like, I haven't played that much funk. I want to learn a funk groove, and you can learn a funk groove, play it to a track, learn some variations, and now you're not just like jamming for the sake of, you know, jamming. You're learning a lot in the process. And so my approach for play along tracks is a couple. If it's a drumless play along track and I want to like be educational with it, sometimes I will, just as an exercise, learn the part that they suggest just because it's not what maybe I would do and I want to learn it and I want to challenge myself to learn that thing. Like right now I have some Dave Weckl play alongs that are really challenging. Bunch of different time signatures, kind of just crazy, insane stuff. So I'll learn the groove Dave played just for the sake of learning. This is what he did. Cool. Great. And once I've kind of learned the different grooves and whatever, then I'll go back and say, what would I do though? And the important part about saying what would I do with this track is treating it like you're actually on a gig. And you have to, when you're on a gig, you can't just play whatever you want and just be like, everybody listen to how cool I am. You have to listen to what other musicians are doing. So if the bass player is playing something in this track, you have to listen to the bass player and say, okay, I want to play this part, but does it line up with what the bass player is doing? Does it line up with what the keys are doing? You know, approach the play along track like you would a song, where you're listening to where you fit into it, not just like shredding over it. Yeah. Because I guarantee, like, that's cool, but you're not really going to force yourself to learn anything new out of that experience. You're just going to like shred over it. And essentially you're just treating it as a metronome at that point, which is fine. We all need to practice to a metronome, but there's a certain level that you can learn when you approach A, learning the parts that the resource suggests you learn, and then B, saying, what would I do? How can I lock in with this track? You know? Yeah. And then additionally, I actually have posted a lot of videos of me on my Instagram playing to pop music. And I get asked a lot of questions about, like, how did you remove the drums from those pop songs? And I actually didn't. I just really try to find songs that I think are that acoustic drums would complement the production well. So instead of, you know, if there's like, I would never drum along to a Led Zeppelin song. There are real drums in those songs that sound amazing. I have nothing to add to that.
Right.
The pop music I'm listening to, though, it's like produced, a lot of the drum sounds are electronic. So if I can lock into with what the track's doing, I can add acoustic drums, and it's a new element that wasn't in the track originally. And it's sometimes it's a challenge to find parts that feel good, that don't get in the way of what's already going on. And it's not like those pop songs need my drumming, but it's just a fun exercise for me to say, okay, this is what this track is. How can I pick and choose where to fit in with it? So yeah, that's kind of what I do for that.
Nice. Just to add to it a little bit, as you were talking there, I remembered there's also a couple apps you guys could check out. Drum Tracks app, DRUMTRAX. It might be 1 or 2 X's, I forget. And another one I just found recently called Groove Buddy. It's a paid one, so I think you get like 3 or 4 free tracks to start, but it's you can purchase the other ones. What's unique about this is that the app has a built-in function that you can actually video record yourself, and it like mixes your drums. You don't have to have an elaborate setup or anything. You can just basically record with your phone, and it'll mix your drums with the track and the video. So kind of like the Yamaha EAD, maybe not as sophisticated, but same kind of idea. So that and you can slow down the track or speed it up. So Groove Buddy is the name of that, if you guys want to check that out. As far as recording it and posting to social media, I mean, I know not everybody has Pro Tools, not everybody has Logic. I'll be honest with you, I use Reaper. I freaking love Reaper. I love it. If somebody handed me Pro Tools right now, I'd probably tell them, take it back. I don't want it. It's a great, inexpensive DAW that is you should have to pay a lot more for it than you do. It's a great learning tool too. Like if you're just getting into recording, another one you could try would be, what's that? Audacity.
Yeah, or like if you have a Mac, GarageBand. I think it's just like finding, you record, you load the song into whatever DAW you're going to use, Reaper, GarageBand, Logic, Pro Tools, whatever. You load the song in, you record to it like you would anything else, and then while you're doing that, you have a video rolling that you sync up with later. That's kind of it. Like, Yeah.
Yeah. So, and and like Tim was saying before too, you want to treat these tracks like it's an actual band. How can you complement what's already there? Not just shredding over top of it. Really try to create and write a nice part for it. I think it's good practice for mixing too. Like when you record yourself to these tracks, it gives you an opportunity to try to like set the drums in the mix nicely. It's all really good educational stuff, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. So
definitely,
yeah, I think it's a really good thing for drummers to have drumless tracks. I actually, I don't know if you mess with it, making tracks at all, but I just picked up some. Like I just downloaded the Contact Player, and what's it? Acoustic something. Couple different players. I want to get into like virtual instruments and creating my own tracks.
Sure, yeah. I've created a couple that are kind of fun. One of them's in 11/8.
Nice.
And the other one is one that kind of messes around with time. So like, yeah, it's fun. I mean, at this point, I don't have that much time to do that. And there's so much like, for me personally, I think anyone who wants to do it, they absolutely should, because it's like a super cool, like for you as a teacher, it's like epic that you can use it for students. And I mean it's anyone that's ever looking to be a professional, like that's a great way to make income. Like you want to make play along tracks, like sure, they don't have to be like Grammy award winning drum play along tracks, but if 10 people a month want to buy your play along track thing for $3, like that's $30 you did not have when the month started that you did at the end. Yep. That cost you what? 2 hours to make? You know what I mean? And if you sell $30 a month for an entire year, you're looking at $300 this year. That took you 2 hours.
Right. I definitely want to get into it for the students, like you were saying, because when I'm teaching a student their first set of grooves and stuff, I'm always trying to find play-alongs that they could work with, but I'm finding the tempos are always too fast, or there's too many complicated parts.
Yep.
Which is really nice for guys like me. I love that stuff, but I just want something that's like doon 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 doon.
Yeah, and I actually do have play along tracks that are like that have really nice count ins that literally 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and a click track that's very obvious where the downbeat is and stuff. I did actually make some of those several years ago. But yeah, man, I have a couple questions if we want to do it.
Yes, let's do it.
2 or 3 of them. Let's see. We'll take a little curveball here. I got a lot of the same questions you did, which is I got a lot of questions, but a lot of them we've kind of already talked about. One of them that's kind of very vague and tough to talk about is finding your niche.
That's a good one.
So for me, and I think I've talked about this a couple of places before, but I think for me, a lot of people now, it's interesting. I live a dual lifestyle. I have my Nashville life, which is I work in my studio, I play shows in town, I go on tour, I do all this stuff, and like that's great, and I love that. And before that, it was just like touring, and that's all I did. I didn't really do that much on the internet or whatever. So I get hired by a lot of people in Nashville to do services like that, and that's like one side of my life. And I would say I don't necessarily have like a niche in that world. It's just kind of like I know people that need drums on stuff, so they call me, and I have a network of people and whatever. And you just try to be as professional as you can and stuff. But then I have this other personality that I am, which is like whatever I am online, whether that's YouTube or Instagram or podcasts or my website or whatever. And I think in that world, I'm more of a educator. So I think for me, finding my niche on the internet has been about blending those two things, blending the fact that I have done this professionally and played for a lot of Nashville artists and recorded on a bunch of stuff. And I also am really passionate about transcribing and talking about Benny Greb drum solos and transcribing Chris Coleman and whatever, and finding a way to merge those two things, because I think a lot of educators a lot of educators haven't toured a bunch or done a bunch of session stuff, but they're phenomenal educators and they have great lessons that they teach. And there's a lot of people that are on the road and they're amazing at playing their instrument and backing up the artist they're backing up or whatever. And they teach, but it's kind of like a side thing, and they don't, it's kind of like they do it when they can, whatever.
Yeah.
And there's not as many people who are living in both worlds. And it's not that I'm the only one doing it. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I'm saying that as far as finding a niche, a lot of my students could go to a lot of the other online educators and they go get lessons about, paradiddles and inverted this thing and, how to learn songos and whatever. They go to a bunch of other online educators for that. But when it comes to, I have this audition coming up and I want to know how to prepare for it, they'll book a lesson with me and say, hey, I have this audition for this band. Like, these are the songs they sent. Like, what do I do now? Like, they also maybe want me to run tracks. Like, what do I need to bring to run tracks? And then it's a blending of, well, these are all the drumming things you can do, but also you should email their tour manager and ask them, are they going to have an interface there? If so, do you need to download a driver for the interface so that you can use their driver to run Ableton, or like a bunch of stuff like that, there's not as much, there definitely are, but there are not as many places online where you can readily just like ask someone, hey, how do you audition for a band that's on a major record label. So that's kind of like part of the niche I exist in. And I think also like the transcription thing, most people hate transcribing. So by sheer necessity of people needing transcriptions and there not being that many people that do it, I've been hugely fortunate to work with a bunch of people, clients that are like private people that just want me to transcribe whatever because it's their favorite drum solo, and a bunch of like a ton of companies now that I've transcribed for that. It's just been, that kind of wasn't necessarily something where I looked at the world and said, what is no one doing? I want to do that. It's just kind of like, I love transcribing. And then, 5 years later, I realized that it's a niche that I just kind of fell into because I like it and most people hate it.
Yeah. Trying to find a niche. I mean, I would assume he or she is talking about drumming, right? Like in the drum realm. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't even know what my niche is. I do a bunch of different things too. I teach, I play gigs, I do session work, I have a podcast, I make content. I don't know. I think finding your niche.
Yeah, right.
Just whatever it is, right? I think that just requires trying a lot of different things.
Trying a lot of different things, and I would also add like being authentically you.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, because you can think about a niche of like, in a very business sense of, I want to find where no one's at and I want to teach those lessons or whatever. But like you just teaching like you authentically are as a human is unique enough to be its own niche. Like if you separated us and put us in separate rooms and asked us the same set of questions, the first question being, what's the best way to learn a paradiddle? The second question being, how do you learn advanced linear fills? And the third question being something else. I guarantee we would both say completely different answers for all three of them.
Right.
And that to me means that as long as we're always trying to get better at discovering our strengths, discovering our weaknesses, someone's going to get something total. And I think that's why, like, I think I get really bummed out about like how much competition there is. And how, it's like, this is the best thing. This is the best thing. This is better than this thing. This is the best website for this. Like, that bums me out because it's like, it doesn't matter. Like there was someone, I put out a video recently that was about what was better, Pro Tools or Logic. And the name was a bit of like a clickbaity title, because I actually never really said like one was better than the other. The point I was making was, here are 5 things I've realized using both of them. I actually use this for this, but if you want to use, if your main focus is this and this and this, you should probably use this program. Like, it really actually wasn't about, because I think that Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton, all of them can absolutely record drums or do whatever on a professional level. Yep. So like whatever you like best, that's what you should use. And I had someone comment like, someone who's been doing this much longer than you, like blah, 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 blah. And he was just like going off about how biased I was in favor of Logic Pro or Pro Tools, which is funny because I actually like Logic way better and use it more than I use Pro Tools. And I think that he meant well by what he was saying, and I understand the points that he was making. So I like responded as best I could with, I was never my intention to say one was better than the other, blah, 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 whatever. But I just think it's funny that we kind of live right now in a culture that's very much concerned with like, what is the best? Because there's only good and bad, and there's only better and worse. And it's really like, well, no. You don't have to be the best at anything. Like, I was thinking about this afternoon. I think a lot of people that's like spurred out of like, I have to be the best in order to be an online educator. I need to be the best gospel chops drummer ever or something, when really it's like, sure, maybe some people only want to take lessons from someone they perceive as the best drummer or whatever. That might be true. But what also is true is there are people that get really discouraged by watching someone who's 40 years better than they are. Like, I don't necessarily want Dennis Chambers to teach me some of his fills because, one, I don't think Dennis would call himself primarily like an educator. He's a player. But then two, like, it's intimidating to watch Dennis Chambers be Dennis Chambers because he is one of my favorite drummers ever and he's incredible. And it's like intimidating when he's like, this is how you play this role, whatever. But if I go to YouTube and there's someone who is not Dennis Chambers and they've spent a couple months digging into this one particular fill, they're only a couple months ahead of where I am.
Right.
You know what I mean? So watching them do it, it's like, oh, they did it. Like they said that they started here and then they like practiced these and now they can play it. That literally might be a better way to learn a Dennis Chambers fill than learning directly from Dennis, at least right. On some level. And I think that like sense. This like whole competition thing of like what's better or whatever, I think can be like a huge distraction for people because a lot of times like it's irrelevant between you and me. It's literally irrelevant who the better drummer is because you're going to communicate certain things that are way better said and make way more sense to certain students than I am. And vice likewise, versa. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so it's just so funny to me. Sometimes I think people get caught up in like that kind of weird competition type mindset on stuff and it bums me out. But I don't even know how I got talking about this.
Finding your niche is just being the best version of you as you can
yes. Be. Thanks. I'm glad you remembered where I was going with this.
Yeah, but it's true though, because like, I mean, it's hard to nail down a niche in that like, I'm going to be the guy that only plays snare drum.
Yeah.
You know, like, what? Okay. You just got to be you. You're right, man. I dig.
All right. I have other questions.
Let's hear them.
This is one I got a lot. So we already talked about recording and mixing and stuff, but this specifically came up a couple times. People asking two questions that are kind of the same thing. What's in your monitor mix and how do you get a good in-ear mix? So for me, I've played in a lot of different live situations. I've played bars where you just have a floor wedge and the monitor engineer is like drunk. I've played arenas where I have in-ears and I'm in a band that has a traveling monitor engineer who his sole job is to each and every night use the same in-ear packs and supply the same mix to the same set of band members. I played in arenas where the monitor engineer is just the hired stage guy and he doesn't know any of us. And I have less than 5 minutes to get a monitor mix in my ears before we throw our stuff up and play because we're just line checking and then going. Like there's so many different variations of stuff. I've been at churches where you have the little boxes that you can just like turn up and down and like whatever you want to do, it's right there and you just turn the knobs and great. And I will say, no matter what, there's like a couple of basic things that I think if you approach them like this, you'll be much better off. And one is whether you're using in-ears or a floor wedge, no matter who is mixing, no matter what in-ears or wedges, like none of that matters. It is not going to sound like a record in your ears. It just isn't. That's not the purpose. Right. So keeping things simpler is very much to your advantage. A lot of people with, you know, if there's a drummer, a bass player, 2 electric guitar players, a piano player, and then 3 singers, a lot of people are like, I want some of everything. Let's do this. And they start kind of mixing stuff like they would an album. And for me, there's just so few because the more people you put in your ears, the more variables you introduce to like absolutely destroy your mix. Because it could be that like, yeah, sure, during sound check, that guitar player sounded awesome where you had him. Even though he's only playing rhythm guitar and you don't really need him that much in your ears, he's not contributing to a ton of what you need to know to be in the right spot in the song and start the right stuff, like whatever. He's not the most important person on stage for you to fit into the music, even though you want him, if he sounded one way in sound check, but then during the gig, he's like playing twice as loud and he's all you can hear, like you didn't really need that much of him in the first place. So it was kind of a risk to add him, you know? So
yeah,
that's kind of one thing, is like anyone you put in your mix can, their level, whether it's the monitor engineer gains them up or they just throughout the course of the show play softer or louder or whatever, like anyone can change your mix just by sheer free will of their own playing. So you have to know that like, okay, I'm going to put this person in my mix. If you don't know who that person is, play it safe, not sorry. If you don't know who that guitar player is and you never play with them and they're playing rhythm guitar and you don't really need them in your ears, don't put them in your ears, because you don't know how they're, you know. But for me, like, it's kind of like gauging, do I need this in my ears? And I always start with, I get, if there is click track, I'm getting click track first, period. Yeah. I need click track, period.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I need vocals. I need to hear those two things, because the vocalist not only lets me know where I am in a song, but like the vocalist, when they're talking in between songs and they say, so here's our next song. If I can't hear the vocalist and they say, so here's our next song, and I'm just like sitting back there, like waiting. And then they look back after 10 seconds and I'm like, oh, I have to start the next song. Like, that's not what you want. So even if they're like a terrible singer and you can't stand to listen to them sing and they're never on pitch, like you still need vocals in your ears.
Yeah, for sure.
So click, vocals, and then bass. Those are my three things that I have to have. Right. And I will do that in that order of priority. Like, even if I can't hear vocals, I need the click track, because if we're playing to tracks or whatever, I need to know what tempo we are. Vocals, bass. And then beyond that, it's like, if it's a band where I don't know a ton of the people, I'll try to evaluate as quick as I can, like, who's the harmonic player that's giving the most information about the song, and then I want that person next. Sometimes that's a guitar player, sometimes that's a keyboard player, but who's like doing the best job at giving me the chords and the harmony that are part of this song, and I want that. And then it's just like personal preference from there. Like, do I want guitars? Maybe the guitarist isn't great, so I don't have him in my mix. Like, or maybe this guitar player is amazing and I actually don't need that much guitar, but I really just want to be inspired and hear that person all night. Like, there's a lot of reasons to change your mix, but my thing is like, as a starting level, unless you have control over your own mix, because that's the other thing. Like, there's a lot of times where sound engineers have never been on the other side of it. They've never been in a band. So learning how to communicate with sound engineers is really important too, to get a good mix, because you can look over like a lot, like a classic situation is, you'll be like on stage sound checking and they're like, okay, let's go through all the instruments, and like there's no structure, there's no anything, and it's just like total free for all. So what I try to do if I'm like music directing or in a place where I can be a leader and there's no structure, like if the sound engineer has his system, like let him do that. Don't try to interrupt that. But if everyone's just kind of like, there's no structure, and some of the musicians are like, you'll get this at churches, like some of the musicians are professional, some of them aren't. The engineer might be a professional, might be a hired, like, or a volunteer or whatever. So I'll try and say, hey, here's what we'll do. Let's go through each instrument, and everybody we'll start with this person, go around and all the way to this person. And one at a time, you just hold your hand up if you want more of something, or down if you want less of something. And this gives everyone an equal playing field of like, we start with kick drum and I start playing the kick drum, and then we go to the first person, they up and down, the second person up and down. This gives everyone a chance to get what they need, and gives the sound engineer a chance to, because like it's really frustrating for them when you're in the middle of a song and the guitar player's like, hey, I need more vocals, and then the drummer's like, hey, I want less bass, and then like the more and more things you add on top of a sound, like he can only turn so many things at once. Right. So at least initially getting a system where you can have an organizational way of like everyone's getting what they need. And then you run part of a song after everyone has all the levels, we've line checked and checked everything. Then you run part of a song and it's like, okay, at first when you're getting levels, you're kind of guessing like this is typically how much I wanted this thing or whatever. Now you run part of a song and you realize, okay, I need more vocals because when they were sound checking, they weren't singing quite as loud as like whatever. And then you're like kind of set up to, it's like really rare in the middle of a song or a set where I ever ask for anything. And part of that's just out of experience. Like if you do it enough, unless you're, because there are like, I always joke with a lot of monitor engineers about like divas. Like there are some people that just like no matter how much they do it, they don't realize that like, and it's like notorious with vocals because vocals are really hard to do live on stage. It is really hard for a vocalist to, and a lot of times vocalists are also people that don't play an instrument. Yep. So they don't necessarily think about it from a like, what do I need live standpoint? They're just thinking like, I want to hear a bunch of myself and then I want to hear the like music as a whole. And they kind of want that experience of like the studio album that their vocals are just louder than they usually would be. It's like, that's not going to happen. As a vocalist, you need to figure out what instrument on stage gives you the best sense of what key you're in and what instrument on stage gives you the best sense of timing, and then only have those things in your ears, not the guitar player that's only playing slide and not really contributing to any of the, so yeah, that's a lot of opinions about that.
The other thing I would like to add to that too is, depending on what situation you might be in, if you're playing like a club gig or whatever, or if you are working with a sound engineer that is known around town or whatever, find out what kind of system that they're running, because there are a lot of times you might be able to mix your own ears. I do it quite a bit. A few of the clubs in the area here have QSC systems or like the old Behringer M32s, and you can download an app for that. And I have my phone hooked up to my hi-hat, and I could go in there and just mix my own ears whatever I want, so I'm not having to yell to the sound guy, hey, could I get more of this, more of that? And it also kind of makes me just feel a little bit better, because like when you have in-ears in, man, I always just get freaked out that like somebody's going to push a button or something and blow my eardrums out. So it's nice. It's nice to be able to control your own ears. So if you've never looked into that, definitely check with the club or the sound guy and say, hey, do you have a setup where I can hop on the Wi-Fi from your board and download an app? That way I can mix my own ears. That's one of my favorite ways to get monitor mixes now. So,
yeah, and I'll add to that. Learn the monitor engineer's name.
Oh yeah.
Like, because there's nothing. Because as a instrumentalist, like, and learn how to be specific. Like, learn their name. When you show up, say, "Hey, my name's Tim. Are you the engineer?" And they say yes. And you say, "Oh, okay. What's your name?" So that way, all night when you need adjustments, you're not like, "Hey, guy. Hey."
Yeah.
Hey, or you know what I mean? Like, you're like, "Hey, Jeff," because I've been on the other side where I've tour managed and road managed for bands and been the drummer and the music. Like, so I'm kind of the person that's advancing the show and whatever. And I'll show up at places and like shake the engineer's hand, and I've like talked on the phone with them for like a couple times to advance production and whatever. And like, so we don't know each other, but we've talked several times, and I know his name because I've seen it in like 12 emails. And like, we'll be sound checking. He's like, "Hey, drummer," and it's just like, come on, man.
Oh yeah.
Why don't you know my name? And it's not like a pride thing. It's just like everyone is a person. And if you have the ability to call them by their actual name, that's always better than just like, "Yo, guy," or whatever.
Right.
And I'm terrible with names, so I'm not saying that I always do it well. But so that's the first thing. And then like learning how to communicate. If you can't control your own ears, learning how to communicate with an engineer in specifics is way better than just like if you're able to say, so you have too much kick drum, you can say, "Hey, I have too much kick drum, bring it down." that engineer, depending on how stuff is set up, literally it might be that like moving that fader, how much they usually would, like they don't know how much that's changing in your ears always. Yeah. Or in your wedge. So being able to say, not just like, hey, I need less kick drum, or hey, turn the kick drum down. Being able to say, hey, I could use 15% less kick drum. Now that's a thing where they can look and say, oh, okay. And that's getting them way more in the ballpark than just like, turn it down.
Right.
Because if I say, hey, I need 15% less kick drum, that's one thing. If I say, hey, I need 80% less kick drum, whoa. That's both of those things are turn the kick drum down, but one of them is way more than another, you know? Right. And if you have the ability to talk specifically with engineers, like now I have the ability to, like, because in-ear, the other thing about in-ears is a lot of times, depending on how stuff is set up, you don't have a ton of control over how things actually sound. So it might be that your snare drum sounds terrible in your ears. And there's sometimes where you can't change that, just like how it's set up. It's like they have no control over changing the EQ for what you're hearing in your ears. But sometimes they do. So if you can, it's going to make everybody's life better if you tweak the ears to sound better. So if you can, you know, not necessarily during sound check, but if there's a moment where you can walk up and say, hey, I was noticing during sound check that the snare drum has this weird, like, kind of like mid-range thing. Like, is there a way we could scoop out some of the mid-range? I think it would add clarity. Like, whatever it is, one, if you know the person's name, you're not just like, hey, guy, snare drum sucks, like, whatever. But if you can say, hey, Tom, dude, everything sounds awesome, but in the snare drum, I was noticing it kind of sounds flappy in the ears. So is there any way you think we could scoop out what? That's like a real conversation two people would have instead of, hey, guy, make my ears sound better. Right. You know, so always treat those. And like, I think there's this funny thing that like the engineer is like, I play with this phenomenal artist and he is so talented. He's an incredible songwriter, an incredible performer. He has an amazing voice. And like when he goes on tour, he's bringing himself first because he is the talent. And the second person he's going to call to make sure he can go do a show is his front of house engineer. Because there's literally nothing more important in a show than who is controlling what the audience hears. So like as a musician, I think a lot of us are like, well, we're the reason that stuff sounds good. So we're the most important people. And really like, obviously we need to be good. And like a set of terrible musicians on stage is not going to be great. But a good engineer can make or break how a show sounds. So don't ever think that you're more important than they are, because you probably aren't. Or at the very least, we're all equally involved in making this music. So like, I think a lot of times people can treat stagehands or engineers or whatever as kind of just like lesser people that are here to serve me. And it's like, well, no, everyone's here to serve the audience. And anyone who's getting in the way of that needs to get gone. So, yeah.
True story. True story. I actually just had that happen last weekend where I don't know, the toms had like a weird gate happening. Like I'd hit it and it just and I'm like, oh man, like everything sounds great. If there's any way you could maybe, I understand if you're doing that for the front of house, but if you can help me get that out of my ears, I'd appreciate it. So.
Yeah. And you'll get that with kick drums too a lot. Like a lot of people will hard gate a kick drum where if you're depending on what player, like whoever was playing the kit last that they mixed might have been really heavy on the kick drum. But if you're not as heavy on the kick drum, it might be that when you play like a quick double on the kick drum, the first double doesn't get picked up or something. Yeah. And that's something where if you can add to your bag of communication skills, like, hey, like even if you're not a tech nerdy person, you don't have a studio, knowing what a gate is can be really valuable, because then you can say like, hey, my kick drum sounds weird. That's one way to say it. And like the engineer might be like, oh, he just like thinks I suck at my job. Well, like I think he sucks at his job. Like we had so-and-so in here last week and he was a way better drummer. You know what I mean? Like, or you can say, hey, Mark, drums sound awesome, but the kick drum, it sounds like it's got a pretty strong gate on it. Can you back the threshold down on it? I think some of my doubles are getting lost. Different situation there, man.
Yep.
With different results. And I think, again, like back to what we were talking about way earlier, like I have students all the time that I'm always trying to think like, how can I teach them professionalism? And all of the monitor stuff is like a good example of, sure, if you sound awesome, that's great. But that's only the 40-minute set you're playing. Outside of that, the sound check, how you were on the bus before, how prepared you were, like all these other things contribute to like, and that's true with music and being a professional, but that's also just like true in life, man. Like,
yeah,
there's so many times where like, yes, you're at Target and you're checking out and like, sure, you're only going to interact with that person at the counter and I'm terrible at this, like, because a lot of times when I'm going to the grocery store or whatever, I just want to like get in and out. But I try to, as much as I can, make it a point to like acknowledge the existence of the human beings I'm like interacting with, especially professionally, but even just in life. Like, yeah, they work at Kroger, like, cool. That doesn't make them less important than you. So like,
sure.
And like all of us, whatever job we have, all of us have, been distracted at work. We've dropped the ball, we've whatever. So like, sure, maybe this Kroger employee should have been standing at the register right when you got there, but like, this is not the end of the world. They still have a name. They still have a life. They still have things that they're thinking about, like struggles there. You know what I mean? Like, I think if all of us could be better at that. And my wife is like amazing at it. This is something that I should steal from her. But she always like compliments someone when she walks up to a register, and she does it out of the like literal goodness of her heart. She'll like see a necklace she likes. She's like, "Oh, I love your necklace," or whatever. I selfishly am like, I should start doing that because I would have an easier time dealing with people if I do that. So, but either way, the end result is like all of us feel like more of a connection. And I think that's better than, a lot of times when we're just pissed about the people that work at the fresh market or whatever. And it's just like, dude, all of us are people and we're all most of us are trying to do the best we can. So just chill.
Hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah. Man.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is all the questions I had. Like I said, I had some other random stuff that was kind of overlapping with you, but yeah, man, that's kind of all I got.
I think that's good, man. We got about an hour and a half in there, so
I like it.
Well, I mean, I know if people have any questions, they know how to reach us. And if they don't, Tim, obviously you're on Instagram, YouTube.
Yeah, I'll do it. So Instagram at Tim Buell. My email is timbuellmusic@gmail.com, and that's Tim, Buell, music@gmail.com. So Instagram, email, my website, timbuellmusic.com, and then also lessons, all that stuff. I try to give out a ton of lessons for free on YouTube, and then also do a ton of like a lot of the lessons I have downloadable resources. So I was talking about the mix thing, and you can go get a template for the project I used in that, and like all the transcriptions I do, you can go download the transcription. So I try to give out as much like resources that you can actually download and stuff. So my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tim Buell, or just type in "who is Tim Buell" into the YouTube search bar, and that'll get you there.
Nice. Yeah. And I could vouch for Tim on that. I've downloaded some of his things, signed up on your website there. I was going through your transcribing course. Lots of good information, man. I think out of all the people that I could have did this Q&A thing with, you're definitely the man to talk to. So,
oh man, thanks.
I appreciate you coming on. This is a great idea. I'm glad we chatted about this and decided to go forward with it. I hope we've helped some people out there. Oh,
and here, before we sign off, additionally, sure, I'll say, what I'll do is I'll build out a web page on my site, like timbuellmusic.com / what's a good one? Like, I'll just do up and coming. Does that make sense? timbuellmusic.com. Is that the best URL I can do? timbuellmusic.com / let's do timbuellmusic.com / up and coming.
Okay.
So UPAND coming, all one word, no slashes or anything. timbuellmusic.com / up and coming. And I'll have like all the stuff that we talked about that I already, like the mix template we talked about, the left-handed exercises, all of the stuff we talked about that I already have like PDFs and stuff for. You can go to that web address, timbuellmusic.com / up and coming, and you can download all the stuff we already talked about. So you don't have to go find it on YouTube or whatever. It's like right there. That's awesome. What we'll do.
Beautiful, dude. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, man.
Cool.
Well, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, and it was really good talking to you again, man. It's been a little while.
Yeah, man.
Sweet. All right, guys. Tim, we'll talk to you real soon, brother.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.